I think how I show up in a boardroom, I see that as a superpower now. That authenticity of like who I am. I'm different to most of the people in the boardroom. I like to say I craft bold ideas into tangible outcomes, and I think there's probably was no bolder ambition than firstly to secure the hosting rights for this tournament and then to make it such a success. You want every match to feel like a home match, regardless of which teams are playing. A superstar team is more than just a team of superstars. I think it's about...
Welcome to Rules Don't Apply, where we're speaking with pioneers, provocateurs and purveyors of non-conventional wisdom. Recorded alongside a live audience at South by Southwest Sydney, this series seeks to redefine the art of the possible. Because for those looking to navigate what's next, the rules of today may just no longer apply. All right, South by Southwest Sydney, if you are roaming the gallery, waiting near the Platinum Lounge, or just coming out of the Messina queue, come on over to the Growth Distillery. We have a very, very special conversation indeed. We are filming live at South by Southwest, where we are shooting Rules Don't Apply. And when it comes to Rules Don't Apply, there are few people that I can think of right now better suited to this mantra than Kim Anderson. For those playing at home, Kim has been the creative and the strategic force behind some of Australia's most iconic sporting and cultural moments of the last few years. You may recognise one, the FIFA World Cup, in particular the Women's World Cup, where the Matildas broke every viewership record, I think, across the country. With a career spanning Australia, New York, London, New Zealand, Kim is widely regarded as a prolific innovator in the marketing and branding space. She has a reputation in particular for her unique ability to build and harness fandom and build cultural brands along the way. Kim, thank you so much for joining us. Did that make you particularly uncomfortable?
It always makes me uncomfortable talking about myself, so I'm glad that you were doing it.
So thank you so much for joining us. And we've got so much to unpack. I think I'm super excited to be talking to you. But I thought we could start with what you're most proud of. I mean, you've changed the face of sport for an entire generation of young Australian women. But from all of the success that you've had, as the Chief Marketing Officer of the Women's World Cup, what are you most proud of in everything that you've done?
Yeah, look, I think, there's some really sexy records that we broke in terms of TV viewership and the number of people who've attended the event. And they're all amazing. But I think for myself and my team, the social impact that we had at the end of the tournament was really what made us super proud. Changing perceptions of young boys and girls about what it means to be a female athlete, proving the business case for women's sport, making sure that women are seen as primetime material. I think having the single largest TV event in history is no mean feat in Australia, and so it's great that that's a women's sport moment. And also, I think it was one of the first times in a sporting event that I've been involved in that I've had men like you, my colleagues, my friends, my peers, contact me and ask me for tickets to go with their mates, not with their daughter, like it was some sort of, good that they were doing in the world. This was a prime time, event that people saw for the incredible athletes that they were. And so I think changing those perceptions around how women are perceived in the world, I think that's what I take away from it.
And in your mind, what did that?
Look, I think it's a lot of things. I think if I look back at how we approached the event, we were very brand-led in how we did that. And so if you look back at the Women's World Cup before us, which was France 2019, that was a blockbuster success too. It became the single largest sporting event in the world for women, behind only the Olympics and the Men's World Cup. That's how big it is, like bigger than the Rugby World Cup, bigger than all the rest. But even the brand around that, the tagline was Dare to Shine. And to me, that sat really uncomfortably. Like, these are the best female athletes in the world, and we're still sort of striving to get somewhere. So we decided to be super bold in our ambitions for it. Let's really kind of break conventions and for the category. And so we went with Beyond Greatness, and that was about going beyond greatness on and off the pitch. So again, not just the medal around your neck, how can we change the perceptions of the child who believes they can too? And so if you are a business, as you should be, and be brand led and have that spread across everything from delivery to fan experience and everything in between, that's a really high bar to put on yourself.
Yeah.
Because greatness is already exceptional. How do you go beyond greatness? And so for us, that was, we've got to really smash some records. We've got to really hit some high targets. But we've also got to create the most incredible player experience possible. For them, it's got to feel like we're equal with the Men's World Cup. We're giving you business class flights, your own hotels, amazing base camps, all the preparation you need to perform at your best. And then again with the fan experience, like let's make these stadiums so amazing in terms of that experience so that people want to come back for more. And so I think we did that, and I think the storytelling that we did in the lead-in, you know, the way that we sort of let the experience lead the brand, it was all about our brand being a verb and people coming to, you know, do the activities, sample the experience so that they got excited about what was to come. And so, we loved doing that.
As someone that builds cultural brands, what's the recipe? Right? If there was such a thing, what are the cornerstones for building culturally tectonic brands?
Yeah, so I think, looking back at the Women's World Cup, you could be forgiven for thinking, well, the Matildas smashed it out of the park, so therefore, of course, it was a smashing success. I think what we knew was this event is going to be held across 64 matches in 9 host cities, partly in New Zealand, which only care about rugby and didn't know their team. And in our country, they could have maybe only played, they were guaranteed to play 3 out of those 64 matches. So when you look at that as a challenge, it's like, well, how do we bring, our target was 1.5, we've got 2 million people in the stands, but how do you bring people beyond a Matildas football fan to that? And so you look to culture. What are the intersections of culture with women's football? And so some of those were very values-led. So women's football is known for being a really inclusive atmosphere. So we made our brand all about inclusivity and welcoming the world, whether that was people from lots of different cultures to, you know, LGBTQ communities, you know, as diverse as you could think. But we also look to music and gaming and the fact that women's footballers love coffee and tattoos and, you know, all these sort of little cultural entry points that people might resonate with that suddenly would bring them into this sport, and then they would fall in love with the women's footballers on the field. So it had to be about, I guess, interests beyond just what was on the pitch.
It's no small feat, you know, I was just thinking as you were saying that, to be able to create an air of elite without elitism.
Yes.
And I think that's a really fine tightrope to walk. I could imagine that in marshalling resource in the lead up to this, you know, particularly with these very, very lofty, or not so, in retrospect, not so lofty ambitions, that you were probably met with some friction along the way.
Yes.
How'd you go about, you know, breaking down those barriers and marshalling the herd behind this, you know, amazing ambition?
Look, it's a great question. In my own consulting business, I like to say I craft bold ideas into tangible outcomes, and I think there's probably was no bolder ambition than firstly to secure the hosting rights for this tournament and then to make it such a success. The things that people tend to say you can't do or are too ambitious or are a little bit too big, they're the things I get really curious about and say, well, why? And, you know, what about if we thought about it this way? And so I think I'm naturally that person. But I think we went at it we were really data-driven in how we looked at it. We saw this cultural movement happening around women's football, and so we really tapped into that in a really great way. But we also had to contend with a whole bunch of naysayers who thought we weren't going to be successful. And so I think it was really, my boss would have called me the believer in the team. He said, you were unwavering in your commitment, in your belief that we were going to be successful, even when everyone else lost their way. And so actually a lot of my job was standing up in front of a lot of groups of people, whether they be broadcasters or commercial partners or the internal team, governments, whoever it was, to just hammer home the why behind why this would be successful, what the brand meant, why it was so impactful, and just present the business case time and time again. And so it was exhausting. At times it was super challenging because when you're breaking new ground, and what we were trying to do was, we called it a tournament of first. So in every part of the experience, we were trying to do something new and something groundbreaking. That's tricky.
Yeah.
So to bring people along, I think it is about your belief in it and making sure that you can galvanise people around that.
Did you get it wrong at any point along the way?
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is that we were sprinting a marathon every day. So to give context, the size of the tournament in terms of the number of matches and all the rest of it, it was the same size as the Men's World Cup. They had 12 years to plan theirs. We had 2 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So we didn't have kind of the luxury of actually navel gazing on those mistakes for too long. You know, we started planning in a 4-month lockdown. It was 9 months before the travel ban got lifted in New Zealand and I could even go and meet my team over there. So we were just moving at such pace that any small mistakes were sort of wrapped up in, well, what's the next thing and how do we make an impact there? So
was it a blessing, on reflection, was it a blessing in disguise that you're just in this pressure cooker situation?
Yeah, you sort of didn't have time to get too worried about the fact that we were doing risky things all the time. I mean, one of my favourites when you talk about culture, so we had to think of, you know, all these sort of promotional ideas to launch different things, and for 100 days to go, which was a really big ticketing milestone, we talked with our agency and we came up with this idea of what we called the unity chant. And so this was going to be a football chant that everyone in the stadium could be a part of. It would represent inclusivity. It would represent, you know, going beyond greatness in yourself. And when you think about that, that's breaking conventions. Football chants are very tribal, you know, I'm Liverpool, you're Arsenal. And when you turn up to a men's football match, you often don't feel like you're part of the experience if you don't know the chants. And so we wanted to be the antithesis of that. And so we came up with this chant, and my boss, to be fair, who was very, you know, gave me quite a long leash on a lot of things, was a little bit like, this feels like a really big risk. Are you sure this isn't going to fall flat?
It's a bit drum circle.
It's a bit drum circle. And I was like, I just think we've got to do things differently, and we might get it wrong, but I think it'll create a bit of buzz and we'll see what it... Anyway, it became one of people's favourite parts of the experience on the day. And I even had people at the final saying, oh my God, I can't believe it's my last Unity beat. And to me, that exceeded my expectations of what I thought it would do. But I think we were... You know, you've got to do things that make you a little bit uncomfortable sometimes if you're trying to break norms and push through.
I'm curious, you know, I'm certainly not a sports aficionado by any stretch. I can imagine that dealing with FIFA as another third party adds a whole raft of complexity in terms of managing expectations, not just to the Australian bodies, but also to the global elites.
Yes.
How'd you go about juggling those chainsaws?
Yeah, look, it's tricky, right? And I think we were also, for the first time, we were guinea pigs of a new system. So this is a bit technical, but generally what has happened in the past is, say, the IOC will say, Sydney, you're the winner, you go run the Sydney Games. They recruit a local team, and it's what's called a local organising committee. For the first time, FIFA got rid of that organising model, and they said, we're going to hire staff in the local area. And so we were all FIFA employees.
Gotcha.
And so in some respects, it was FIFA's first time running the tournament as opposed to sort of having a third party run it. And I think that came with a lot of challenges because the role that they were playing was different, and they wanted to maybe get their hands dirtier than we were sort of used to. So there were a lot of challenges in trying to figure out who plays what role. I mean, from a brand perspective, do I make the decisions on what's happening here, or from a global brand perspective, you know, does FIFA make the decision? And so, you know, we did have a lot of healthy debate around those areas. And I think marketing, I think for some respects it could have been really tricky. I think the beauty of it was because marketing is, you know, 95% done before you actually kick a ball. I got some really early wins around our brand launch and a few things, and so the leash became longer and longer for me. Whereas I think for some other areas it was trickier because, they weren't delivering until tournament time, and so there was probably more nervousness around from FIFA's side as to how you do that. So, yeah, look, it was a tricky triangle. We had Australia, New Zealand, and FIFA, and then a very complex ecosystem behind it.
And on reflection, FIFA taking that new role, do you think that that's going to be especially given the success, do you think that that will be used as, a model for success going forward, or?
Absolutely. They're using it. I think rugby's adopting it for the next Rugby World Cup. So, it's sort of seen as this new framework to operate under. And I think there's value in it as long as the local expertise is sort of valued in different ways. And it means that a company like FIFA actually retains a lot of the IP moving forward rather than it always sort of being outsourced to different countries. So, look, I think we definitely nudged them on a lot of things because they're used to running men's World Cups one way, and we were sort of saying we need to do some things differently. And so, there was definitely healthy debate every day within the sprinting and marathon kind of scenario that we were in.
If you had your time again, would you do anything differently?
Look, I think some of the things that I knew would be really powerful, I think I probably would have fought for budget for them earlier. So one of them being our multicultural engagement program. I know you spoke to Reg from Cultural Pulse earlier. So we worked with those guys. We wanted if you're going to be the most inclusive event ever, you want every match to feel like a home match. Regardless of which teams are playing. And I think that program was really powerful for us because, as an example, one of my favourite matches was Colombia, Germany at the Sydney Football Stadium. The atmosphere was, I can't describe it, off the hook in a way that I can really only parallel with the atmosphere at that quarter final, in Brisbane for the Matildas. And in a completely different way, we worked with those communities to make sure that they could bring in their musical instruments and their flags and their dress and just really make it feel like this, is a match in Colombia, not in Australia.
I want to talk about fandom for a second, because I'm a firm believer that there is a big unlock for any brand, sporting or otherwise, in thinking about your consumers as fans and treating them as fans and unlocking, the transcendent power of being, a fanatic. Right?
Yes.
Firstly, would you agree? And if so, or even if not so, what do you think are the core principles that you can take as a brand, even if you're outside of sport, to harnessing fandom, particularly amongst the fanatics for your brand?
Yeah, look, I think with fandom, and we were looking at that too, right? Like you do have your avid fans, like your Matildas fans, and we had to make sure that whilst a lot of our marketing actually wasn't aimed at them, it had to still feel authentic to them, right? And so I think that's the balance, is thinking about what are all the different levels, and there's always going to be levels, and sometimes people will oscillate between them as well.
We're a fickle bunch sometimes, us Aussies.
We are a fickle bunch. And these days, I think from a sporting context, people are following athletes as individuals more than they're following, say, the Arsenals of the world.
Look at Drive to Survive.
100%.
Perfect example of that.
So I think looking at fandom as just one aspect of like really complex, multi-dimensional characters, what are all the different interests that your fans have, and trying to tap into culture and entertainment and broader interests beyond just the sport, and thinking about storytelling as a really powerful way to do that. I think if you just, I think back in the day there used to be less entertainment options, and so, you would just go down to your Sunday footy and that was your thing, but these days you're competing against the Wiggles and gaming and, streaming options.
We're all competing against the Wiggles.
Totally. And so I think for us, we really thought long and hard about that, because coming out of, when I started, the Tokyo Olympics had just happened. We're like, we don't even know whether we can have fans in a stadium, let alone, viewers around the world. And so thinking about, I guess, the backlog of people's excitement to attend something, but also the fact that there would be music events and all these things that hadn't happened for years would suddenly be probably happening in the middle of 2023 alongside us.
I can imagine that that's really interesting, and that you would have had to have had a fair amount of agility in your plans, right? Because you've got all of these contingents for if these three things, we can do them, this is what we're going to do, and if not, we've got to repatriate our effort elsewhere.
Yes.
How do you go about gaming that out and not, and maintaining a return on that invested effort?
Yeah, look, we did just have to be really agile, and I think, some of the stuff, we were really dynamic with our advertising, so knowing that we couldn't necessarily 100% predict where's going to sell out first, but cities like Adelaide sold out really quickly, so we had dynamic advertising, we just move it elsewhere. And so I think it was about being really open with our partners as well, whether they were tourism partners, commercial partners, to say, what are all the different scenarios that could happen here? Where do we want it to be? But yeah, maybe we do have an A, B and C plan.
I mean, how do you see sport, women's and or otherwise, evolving over the next few years? I mean, this has catalysed huge change. I mean,
yes.
From rights deals to grassroots engagement of boys and girls. What are the big things that you think are going to play out, and what excites you most about the next chapter in Australian sportdom?
Yeah, look, I think, women's sport, the business case for women's sport is just being proven over and over again. So what surprises me is that more brands haven't jumped on that bandwagon.
You're still having to prove the story. Yeah.
There's like a 7-to-1 return on investment. It's so much better than men's sport, which is in we're in growth phase, they're in mature phase. And so I think that still staggers me. I think what else excites me is just how women's sport is kind of throwing out the men's playbook like we talked about before. And so, there's really great case studies in the US where, say a financial services brand like Ally, who are a big supporter of women's sport, saying in certain categories, we're actually going to sponsor the basketball, but we're not going to cut out all the other financial services providers. We don't care about exclusivity. It's about what we can provide to the fans, and then making sure that the whole ecosystem actually thrives, because they're not being too self-interested about what it means for them. And so I like that there is a bit more, interesting thinking around what's happening around women's sport, and I think that can only improve. When we're looking at athletes as like content creators and where that's going, I think that is wild and super interesting as well, and really challenging, I think, for some of the leagues to kind of think about, where does the line sit. But yeah, those are some of the things.
And how do you maintain alignment to brand values in a world where everyone's got a platform?
Yeah.
I'd like to double click on you for a second. You've got this amazing capability to build culturally resonant brands. How do you sharpen your axe? Right? How do you refine your craft and make sure that you're keeping the tools sharp?
Yeah, look, I think I started out in sports marketing, and then I went and did a whole bunch of other things. So I worked in publishing, I worked in tech, I worked for TEDx Sydney, I ended up in New York and London working in design and innovation, actually for an inclusive design company. So I think my background, what I'm known for is sport, but it's actually quite a small part of what I've done in my life. And so I think for me, curiosity has led me to really interesting places around the world and to really interesting things. And so I look for inspiration in other categories. I look to interesting people, I think.
Who inspires you?
Yeah, who inspires me? Jane Fernandez, that I worked with both on the bid and on the tournament, she is like a weapons grade leader. She is amazing. She's just one of those people who I think her door is always open. She's got more on her plate than anyone else, but she is always smiling and always ready to help someone. So a really compassionate but compelling leader. And so I think it's people like that sort of make me think about my own leadership style and my own values and how I show up in the world. And so I try to look to people like that. For me, every project or every job that I take on, it's usually because of one person. I find that one person, I'm curious or passionate about the job at hand, but Jane is actually the person that brought me back into this sports world, into this football world, because I'd seen her as a leader and I thought, you would be really interesting to collaborate with. You are so wise. Yes, that's a hard yes to working with you. And then I sort of was like, hang on, I'm actually working on this World Cup bid. This is pretty exciting. So it's interesting. It's always a human that kind of draws me into something. And so, yeah, that's sort of where I get my inspiration.
If you could bottle great leadership, that, you know, the peloton that you're drafting off, what would be in that bottle?
I think authenticity. So to me...
what do we mean? What do you mean by... It's a big word.
It is a big word, I know.
What do you mean by authenticity?
Look, I think earlier on in my life, I was much more of a people pleaser. And I think what I've really learnt to embrace is, you know, I'm a short 5'3", you know, blonde female who actually looks a lot younger than what I am. And so I'm not going to tell you my age, but I think how I show up in a boardroom, I see that as a superpower now. You know, that authenticity of like who I am. I'm different to most of the people in the boardroom.
You sneak up on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that authenticity, being really transparent with my team, sharing as much as possible, I think that people trust you, people respect you for that when they know that you can do that. I think I have a high standard for excellence, but I also have a really good sense of humour, and so I think those two things need to go hand in hand. You can do really hard things, but have a really bunch of fun doing them. And also being really, you know, values-led, and these are some of the values that I'm talking about. So I think more and more, when I look to other people, it's because I see something in them and I think I want to be more like that. That's more of how I want to show up, both in my professional and my personal life. And so Jane is one of them, but there, you know, there's plenty of others that I look to as well.
I'm going to ask the other side of the coin. Is there something that you see that we all subscribe to as good leadership, quote unquote, that is just doing us a disservice, that we've got to jettison?
Yeah, look, I think sometimes, you know, we're sort of told that we have to be really unique in the world, and I talked about being authentic, but I think sometimes that shows up as people bringing their unique egos to the table. And so for me, I mean, it's funny, I'm sitting here talking, you know, on camera in a microphone. You actually know that makes me uncomfortable, but I much prefer being behind the scenes. And so I think for me, it really is about leaving your ego at the door, because it's not about you. It's brilliant that I get to talk about the amazing work that myself and my team did on this event, but I would be equally proud if I wasn't up here talking about that. And so I think if you're in it for self-interest, you'll never get anywhere. If you're in it for really interesting reasons and you can kind of dig into it, then that's actually what. Yeah, it's got to fill your cup.
Last question from me, because I think the team. I'm just imagining the team dynamics that you have had to lead between the a million different parties, from partners to, you know, brand activations to governing bodies. You would have had to lead an elite team. What makes an elite team?
Yeah, so I like to see my role as leader as like a coach. So it is about recruiting really great talent, often people who are more specialised in certain things like digital marketing than I am, and then about empowering them and unleashing them. So, you know, a superstar team is more than just a team of superstars. I think it's about how do you gel those things together, and how do you know when to push someone, when to nudge someone into action, what combinations of people are going to get a really great result. And so I actually think that's something I'm really good at as a leader, is kind of connecting the dots between you're going to have a really great idea, I'm going to build on it, and then I'm also going to know who to bring in to make it even better and actually make it sort of, seismic impact with it.
The analogy I like to think of is that you conduct an orchestra. You don't have to play the piano, you don't have to play the violin.
100%.
You've just got to conduct the orchestra and let them play the instrument.
Yeah, exactly. I'm definitely I'm more brand and communications led in the marketing world, but
I'm shocked by that.
I'm more of a storyteller, but I'm more of a generalist. I think when I went to New York, over there they're like, are you an email marketer or are you a this marketer? And I was like, mate, I'm from Australia. We kind of do all of it. Yeah. You sort of have had to, growing up in smaller teams. And so I think having the resources at my disposal that I did at FIFA, which sometimes were not budget, but it was about, okay, how can I work with Adidas to get them to do a kick-ass ball launch that's going to get us amazing PR? And that's not me spending my budget, but it's just about a creative collaboration. Yeah.
Kim, we should all be as lucky as your team to work for someone as exceptional as you have been today. And I appreciate you sitting in your discomfort for 30 minutes on screen. Ladies and gentlemen, give Kim a round of applause. She's been an absolute superstar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.